Thank you for joining today's webinar, Building a Quality Resume, Translating Your Transferable Skills and Tailoring Your Resume, with career coach Résumé Kalikian. My name is Joseph Blancas, and I serve as an Associate Director for Alumni Career Engagement at the UCLA Alumni Association. In today's program, Résumé will share strategies that will help your resume stand out and capture the attention of recruiters. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank our Alumni Association sustaining donors. It's with your help that we are able to strengthen the brewing community with career programs like this. Now, for some general webinar housekeeping, we'll have time at the end of our program for a Q&A with our speaker. So please use the Q&A function below to submit your questions. We will also be recording the event and we'll send it out once it's made available. To start our program, I'm excited to introduce Résumé Kalikian. Résumé is currently an Assistant Director of Career Education and Development at the UCLA Career Center. Prior to this, she worked in academic and career counseling at multiple campuses such as CSU Los Angeles, CSU Northridge, Pasadena City College, and Cal Lutheran University. Through her professional experiences, she realized her passion for career development and now runs her own platform and podcast, Career Rise. Through Career Rise, Résumé hopes to motivate, educate, and guide young adults to reach success and fulfillment. She is passionate about all things career and eager to help clients identify their career needs, goals, and challenges through a holistic and developmental approach. Résumé, thank you for being here with us today. I'll turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. And I hope that you find this workshop beneficial. So I want to talk to you all a little bit about building a quality resume and what that looks like and what the current trends are in resume writing, because trends are always changing. It's a very dynamic experience to write a resume. So hopefully we could get some updated information for you all today. A little bit about me before we jump in. As shared earlier by Joseph, I have a variety of experiences from different universities. I studied at Cal State Northridge with my BA in psychology and then my master's in college and career counseling. I am currently working at UCLA's Career Center as an assistant director. And of course, I have my platform, Career Rise, where I do freelance career counseling. And my website is linked right here as well, careerrise.org. I also host a podcast called Coffee and Career Hour, where I talk about all things career related. So my background, again, is from various universities, and I'm happy to be here at UCLA today and be sharing some of my knowledge with the alumni of UCLA. So the objectives of today's session. Hopefully by the end of this session, you will all learn about required and optional content to include in your resume. You'll learn about critical formatting strategies that will make your resume stand out. Learn how to effectively tailor your resume to each job and understand how to highlight your skills in an action-oriented format. So whether you currently have a resume or don't have one, or you have one but you're not confident with it, regardless of where you're starting at, the tips here will help you with kind of taking it to the next level and enhancing that resume. So before talking about resumes, I want to talk to you all about the career development cycle, because resume writing alone is not just a skill set that you develop on its own. It's actually part of our overall career development as human beings. So as people, we go through our lifetime experiencing a variety of different career roles, jobs, maybe some volunteer experiences, or just different exposures that we might have that kind of impact our career goals. And so the first step in this cycle, which you can see it's a cycle, so that means it never really starts and ends. But the first step is exploring yourself. meaning that we all as human beings start making career decisions at a young age through just reflecting on ourselves. If you remember when you were in college, or maybe even now after you've graduated, thinking about, what's important to you in a job, what values you have, what skills you have, what interests you. Those are common questions that we ask ourselves, or we should be asking ourselves when making career decisions. Once we have some clarity in who we are and what's important to us in our work, we kind of move on to exploring pathways. So exploring what's out there. What are the different options for me? So if any of you are maybe thinking about switching career, switching occupations, or advancing in the current field that you're in, you might find yourself in these first two phases where you kind of have to do that exploration again, and then research what's out there and what options are available to you. Moving forward from there, we get to trying opportunities and building a portfolio, which is where the resume writing really comes in. As you gain new opportunities, thinking about the experiences you might have had while you were in college and then post-college, what you've experienced, whether it was paid or unpaid is irrelevant, but any experiences you've had, putting that into your portfolio to be able to actually express the knowledge and the skills that you have. And that's where resume writing fits into the career development cycle. From there, we move on to doing the work, right? So let's say you reflect on yourself, you figure out which career path you want to take, you find a job you want to apply to that, and you build your resume. Then the next step is to actually go out and do the job and perform that. But it doesn't end there, because as human beings, we evolve, we grow, we're dynamic. So after a few years, you might find yourself in the same cycle. But the good news is if you've developed the resume writing skills, develop the reflection skills, develop the skills to be able to make these career decisions, the cycle becomes easier and easier as you go through life. So that's the goal of today, is to kind of help you build those resume writing skills. So the portfolio piece of your cycle will hopefully be more natural, and you'll be more at ease as you're making your portfolio. As I'm going through this, think about what phase you fall into right now, and where you see yourself, now, maybe in the next year, in terms of the career development cycle. Okay, so now as we get into resume writing and building that portfolio, the purpose of resumes, right? We all know we need a resume to apply to a job. However, it actually has a little bit of purpose beyond just applying to that job. The purpose is to highlight your transferable skills and knowledge. And I'm going to get into what that actually looks like and how to identify your transferable skills in a bit. It also is used to help you prepare for an interview. So if you have a successful resume, once it's built and it's ready, you can use that. You should be able to use your resume to reflect back on what you know, what skills you have, so you can prepare yourself for your interviews. And ideally, you want it to build your confidence. I always tell my clients and my students, if you're looking at your resume and it doesn't make you excited and confident about what you have to offer, then it's not ready. Then that means we need to put more work into the resume to really be able to demonstrate and highlight all that you have to offer, because you all have a lot to offer to an employer. But sometimes it's really hard to be able to say that and put that in the context of a resume. So hopefully with everything we learned today, it'll be a little bit easier. And of course, it's to get you an interview. The first impression that an employer has of you is your resume before they get to meet you. So if your resume, let's say if you're applying to jobs and you're noticing a pattern of not hearing back, that means maybe your resume is not reflecting your skills, your transferable skills and knowledge. And that's why you're not getting called back. So the intention is to get you an interview. Okay, so now thinking about the resumes that you currently have, think about if it kind of fits these different pieces. Does it give you the confidence? Does it make you feel ready for an interview? Are you getting callbacks when you apply to jobs? Think about what patterns you're noticing with your resume. So I'm going to ask you all to kind of type in the chat what your thoughts are here. When you submit your resume, how long do you think employers take to scan your resume? And you could just kind of put your thoughts in. in the chat. I got 1 minute, 30 seconds. Less than a minute, less than 5 seconds. Okay, really good responses. Yeah, you're all actually really close. 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Great. So let's find out. 7 to 10 seconds. So it takes 7 to 10 seconds for an employer to make an impression about you from your resume to determine whether they want to move forward with inviting you in for an interview. Of course, if things catch their eye, so within those 10 seconds, if something stands out to them, they're going to be likely to go in and actually read. But they don't get into the details until something catches their eye. So that's why it's really important to kind of make sure your resume is formatted in the right way and it is clear and easy to follow so that it will catch their eye and the things that you're trying to highlight will be noticeable to the employer. So from these two resumes, you can see on the left and the right, there are two types of resumes here. Again, I'm going to ask you all to put in the chat whether you think the left resume, which is the one with the green, or the right resume that doesn't have any color, which of these resumes do you think is a better fit for what employers are looking for? Right. Most folks are saying right. I got a left. I got a few lefts. Okay. Someone wrote the right resume would get through the ATS. Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. I will definitely be talking about that for sure. Some people said depends on the job, which can be true as well. But I will now share what the actual result is. The right resume, the one on the right, will actually, for most industries, actually be the better fit. Although the left one looks a lot cleaner, it looks more modern, there's a little bit of pop of color, which is nice. It's attractive. It's actually a really nice looking resume. I always say, I wish we could do resumes like this because I would love for my resume to look like this. But in reality, what employers are looking for is something more closer to the one on the right. Unless you're applying to creative fields, there can be some exception there. But even then, and I'll tell you why, because we're going to talk about the ATS software, even then with creative fields, I still recommend a more traditional resume like the right one, but you could still demonstrate your creativity through your portfolio for the creative fields. So it doesn't necessarily have to be embedded into your resume because you should have ideally a portfolio to showcase your creative skills. For most other industries, though, especially anything corporate, anything traditional like education, corporate fields, finance, banking, things like that, the one on the right side is what's going to stand out more. And that's all because of the ATS software, which we're going to get into later. So before writing your resume, so now we're getting into the process of writing your resume. Some of you already have a resume, I'm sure, but if you want to revamp it and edit it and update it, before jumping into making those edits or creating new experiences on the resume, I encourage you to actually conceptualize. So take some time to conceptualize your resume. So what I mean by that is you want to think about what content you're going to need to include in your resume, as well as what formatting you're going to be using. So we'll talk about formatting in a bit, but we'll start with the content piece. When it comes to developing your content, I encourage starting with a mind map. So if you've ever made a mind map before, it looks something like this. It could look very different for you, but any process where you can kind of sit through, take notes, conceptualize what you're going to talk about. So when thinking about your resume, you want to think about these categories. What skills do I have to offer? So you have technical skills. We all have some technical skills and we all have some soft skills, we call them, right? Or transferable skills, which is the better term. So thinking about all of the different skills that you might want to share. You wouldn't end up putting every single thing in a resume because your resume needs to be tailored to the job. And we're going to talk about that in a bit too. But when you're conceptualizing, you're not tailoring to a job. You're actually just thinking about who you are and what value you bring to the employer. So this is more of that internal reflection process. What skills do you have? What knowledge do you have? And where did you gain that knowledge? If you are an expert in a particular industry, you could think about what industry terminology you should be embedding into your resume to showcase your knowledge. You can think about maybe projects you might have done even back when you were a student. Those can be relevant to the jobs you're applying to now. So don't eliminate any projects or any internships you might have had back when you were a student, as long as they have given you the knowledge and skills needed for the type of job you're applying to. So really take into consideration all of your experiences and do the mind map process to determine skills, knowledge, and then think about what categories you want to include in your resume. So you might include relevant coursework, even though you're no longer a college student, if it's relevant to the job you're applying to. You might have different types of relevant experiences and categories, and you might have leadership skills, which most industries now want leadership skills, regardless of what industry you're applying to. Keep that in mind. The ability to work with people, the ability to take on leadership roles or solve a problem when needed or take initiative when needed, those skills are going to be transferable to any industry. So really think about that and think about what you might have done in college that demonstrates leadership, or in your current roles and positions that you have post-college where you're demonstrating leadership skills. And then, of course, thinking about your value. This is the whole idea behind the resume, right? What value do you bring to the employer? Industry knowledge and unique skills that might be individual to you. So once you do this mind map process, hopefully you'll have a better idea and you'll have more confidence in what you have to offer to be able to then go into your resume and make those edits or start from scratch. So I want to talk about the different categories that you can have in a resume. These are just some examples of categories, because I like to include this in my workshops, because when I work with my clients one-on-one, I often see very little categories on a resume. I'll see folks talk about their education, and then they'll put all of their jobs and experiences under one category, just call it experience or professional experience, and then maybe they'll have a skills section. Generally, that's not encouraged. I highly discourage that, because remember that employers scan for 7 to 10 seconds. So if everything is listed like a laundry list under one category, it's less likely that anything is going to stand out to them. So if you want to kind of pique their interest, you can get creative with the different types of categories that you have on your resume. And these are just some examples that you can see, and it will change based on the jobs you're applying to. For some jobs, you might include your relevant courses, but for other jobs, maybe your courses weren't as relevant, so you wouldn't include that. Same goes for like class projects. Sample work or links, that might be only for folks who are going into creative fields where they need to demonstrate their creative style. Then they would have sample work to demonstrate. Research won't be relevant to every industry either. So it's just, these are sample categories, but you can really think about the different categories to include and think about your experiences in an overarching way. So it's not just the jobs you've had. Often I see that from clients too. They'll put their paid jobs and then they won't really give credit to their volunteer experiences or their unpaid experiences or like side gigs that they might be doing. They'll kind of minimize that, when in reality, the side gig ends up being more relevant to the job they're applying to. So why not include it, right? If you have the experience. So really thinking about everything you've done in a more comprehensive way. So here's an example of a well-done resume, what you want it to look like, and the types of categories that it has. So relevant experience after education. I do always recommend education to be on the top, even now that you're not students, you're alumni. Even then, especially as your education is relevant to your industries, you want it to be at the top. Usually people who are maybe 15, 20 years into their career might start moving education to the bottom of the resume. But if you're a recent alum, I would encourage you to keep it at the top. And then this resume has relevant experience, relevant projects, customer service, honors, community involvement, and skills. So there's a lot more action and a lot more opportunities to catch an employer's attention because of the different categories that it has. So as you're thinking about as you do your mind map and think about the experiences you have, you can also start thinking about what categories to include on your resume. Now, we get into tailoring your resume, right? So you might have a lot of variety of different skills. You might have many different experiences. However, most industries, they only want a one-page resume. So then we kind of have to determine which experiences should I include, which experiences do I exclude, how do I know which one's more relevant? And that's a common question that I get all the time. So the best way to do that is to go back to the job description. So if you see here, this is a sample job description for an intern position for HR. And I kind of did the process that I would recommend each individual to do with every single job you're applying to. So you want to go through the job description and highlight any specific skills, knowledge, or assignments that they're talking about that you might be doing, and identify what kind of maybe relevant skills that you have from your past experiences that could match what they're asking for. So highlight, take notes in the job description to identify. So this one wants someone who can collaborate, because there's going to be a lot of like working on projects with people. There's going to be a lot of analyzing, using quantitative skill sets, using interpersonal skills that they specifically identified. So then making notes, okay, maybe I did a lot of analytical work in one of my class projects. Maybe I did a research project with the professor back in college that's going to satisfy that skill set. Maybe I took a stats course that's going to showcase my quantitative skills. And then my interpersonal skills, maybe that was through either a current job or a student org that I was involved in back in college, and so on and so forth. So they talk about diversity and wanting cultural understanding. Maybe you did study abroad back when you were in school. That's a great way to demonstrate cultural understanding or exposure. Or if you were involved in any kind of cultural clubs when you were a student, that could be a way to demonstrate that as well. So going through the job description, and sure, this is timely. I definitely will acknowledge that it takes time, but I always say quality over quantity. Maybe you apply to less jobs, but you do a more thorough process when you're applying to the jobs. And ideally, you're going to see better results because you've been a lot more thoughtful about analyzing the job description and then tailoring your resume to that job. And that will give you better results than maybe submitting a generic resume to 50 jobs, right? I have sometimes clients tell me, I applied to 100 jobs. The other day, someone mentioned that I applied to 100 jobs last year and I didn't get any results. And so, of course, we looked at their resume and looked at how they could maybe enhance their skills a little bit better. So that I would say quality over quantity. So even though this is a timely process, it is a really important process to show the employer that you've been thoughtful about your application. So once you do this, then you could go into your resume and you can actually write which experiences you're going to include in that resume. So as you're doing that process, of course, you want to think about your transferable skills and where you gained those skills. So like I mentioned before, paid, unpaid, academic, all experiences count. Freelance experiences count as well. These are some examples of transferable skills, which are kind of more of the soft skills, but there are a lot more. So you can identify them based on what the job description is asking for. And I would say you can use the same terminology. So if they're asking for effective communication skills and you have those skills, you can use the same terms they're using in your resume, because that's actually going to help with the ATS software that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Okay. While you're doing the job search, job description analysis, you also want to actually identify skills gaps, because there might be things that they're asking for that you actually don't have experience with. I never ever encourage misinforming the employer. So if you don't have the skill, I wouldn't include it on the resume. But it's good to know what the gaps are, because actually maybe you can look at different ways you can gain that skill before applying to the job. So for example, if it's a particular software program that they need you to know, you could take an online course through LinkedIn Learning or Udemy or Coursera, any of those online programs where it's a self-paced course that at least gives you an introduction to the particular topic they're talking about. So if you could at least get a quick introduction, take an online course for the software program that the job is asking for, and then you can easily include that into your resume and put basic knowledge. Or you could, sometimes these classes give you a certification. You can put LinkedIn Learning certified on this particular topic. That's going to make you a lot stronger candidate if you take the time to do that. There are other ways to develop the skills that might be missing, so they won't all be available through an online course, but maybe this one says relevant clubs and orgs. That won't be as relevant for alumni, but maybe you can look into professional associations that you can join, where they have workshops and conferences that you can attend to develop new skills. Or you can volunteer in the community, maybe a volunteer with a nonprofit organization that gives you whichever skills you're still needing to develop. Take on freelance projects, things like that. With technology, there are so many different ways that you can actually build skill sets and do projects on your own time that will help you develop skills you're needing. But it's important, especially if you're looking at a particular industry, you're maybe shifting careers or considering a shift, start looking at those job descriptions in the new industry to see what patterns you're noticing, because if there are gaps before you make the switch to the industry, you could work on yourself to develop those skills before switching, okay? So let's say you do that entire process, you've identified your transferable skills, you've identified the categories you're going to have on your resume. The next really important part of a resume, I always call this the meat and potatoes of a resume, because it really is the, this is where the employer actually sees what you have to offer. Once they pass that 10-second scan and they get into the resume, they're going to be reading your bullet points. And your bullet points are the most important part of talking about what you have to offer. So this is a formula. Write this down if you like, take a photo of it, memorize it. This is a formula of how to write a good bullet point. So it should include what you did, how you did it, and then results. So what you did would be specific tasks you might have had at your previous job, projects you might have worked on, people you might have worked with. How you did it is going to be what skills you used. This is where analyzing the job description comes into play, because they want specific skills in the job description. This is where you can embed those into the bullet point to show that you have the skills they're looking for. So it could be soft skills, it could be technical skills, it could be processes. Sometimes you're not going to have a skill set for every single bullet point, but you could describe with processes and details how often you did the task, how many people you worked with on the task, things like that, to really give them more of a detail of processes. And then results. If employers for any industry love data on a resume. So if you can include any percentages, any results on a resume, that's going to look excellent. If you don't have those yet, that's okay. I would say moving forward, you might want to think about it. So if you're in a current job and you're thinking about updating your resume to include that job on there, maybe you could start talking to your supervisor, your leadership, to find out how you can incorporate data. What are some percentages of like an increase in sales or an improvement in the customer satisfaction, something like that, where you could get some data from your leadership to include in your resume. So forward thinking, you can start doing that now. Or learning of something, sorry, there's a misspelling on there, but learning of something new. So maybe the result is that you learned something new. You can definitely include that in the, as a result in the bullet point as well. Okay, but this is the formula for a strong bullet point, and every single bullet point on your resume should fit this formula. And every single bullet point should start with an action verb, because sometimes folks will ask, like, can I do complete sentences on my resume? What is the tone to use? So you don't want to use complete sentences. You want to jump right in and say what you're going to say within that formula that we talked about. And so to jump right in, you start with an action verb. So these are some examples, but actually on the next slide, we're going to look at some sample action statements. You'll notice with the highlights, every single one of them starts with an action verb, and it jumps right in to say what they did. They resolved, they developed, they managed, they improved, right? Then beyond that, now they're getting into, so if we look at the first one, resolved customer inquiries by, now we're getting into how they did it. Using active listening, demonstrating empathy, and providing effective solutions. These are the soft skills, the transferable skills that explain how the person did the task of resolving customer inquiries, resulting in a 98% customer satisfaction rate and a 20% increase in repeat customers. This is the results if you have it, which would be great to include. And the rest of them follow a similar formula. You'll see developed a new marketing strategy. How they did it was by implementing a targeted social media campaign and cultivating relationships with key clients. So this is already showing the reader, this person knows how to be strategic because they developed the social media campaign. They know how to use social media and market via there. And then they also know how to develop relationships with clients. So there's a lot of skills that are being demonstrated here by just describing how they did the one task, which is develop a new marketing strategy. Okay, you'll notice the bottom two don't have any data or percentages, which is totally okay too. It's not expected that you're going to have data for every single bullet point, but wherever you can, it's ideal to include. Okay. So that's the main piece of content for a resume. It's going to be developing your mind, first conceptualizing via a mind map, then developing your categories and what kind of categories you're going to include, which is going to vary based on the job you apply to. Then really developing your bullet points to fit into the formula we talked about. So that's going to be the content of your resume. Then we get into formatting your resume to look something like this. So generally you want, here are some tips to help you keep it to one page, because that tends to be a challenge for folks who have a lot of experience. Keeping it to one page, you want to fill the entire page. You can actually, the default margins are 1 inch on any given document that you use. We do recommend, this is a side note, to actually build your resume in Microsoft Word, because there are some recent studies, or I shouldn't say studies, but recent news that came out that if it's built in like a Google Drive and then changed to PDF from there, or if it's built in another kind of software program, it corrupts the file. And so the ATS software is not able to read your resume. Whereas if you built it in Microsoft Word and then to save it as a PDF, it's okay. The software is able to read it. So I always encourage, just to be on the safe side, to build your resumes from scratch in Microsoft Word. And by the way, templates are completely discouraged. I know there are a lot of great templates out there. Even Microsoft Office has templates, but they're discouraged because a lot of them have a lot of background text boxes and certain things in the background to help with formatting. But those background boxes actually get in the way of the software reading your resume. So with that said, build it from scratch on Microsoft Word is the best way to do it. And from there, if you need more space to keep it to one page, you could decrease your margins to 1/2 inch. That is a common trend and totally okay to do. You want to be mindful of spacing. As you can see in this resume, the spacing is very consistent. There is a space between each category and between each position. If you can keep it like that, that's going to be great, because sometimes if I've seen resumes where they're really condensed, like the experiences, the positions, there's no space between each one, and it feels a little constricted. So you want there to be some breathing room on your resume if possible. So I would be mindful of spacing. We talked about length for one page. The only exception to the one pager is if you're applying to academia. So higher education totally accepts resumes that are longer than one page, or if you're applying to research. Research positions are also acceptable. Everything else, every other industry out there is going to want a one-page resume. Your font can be anywhere as low as 10. So if you need to decrease anywhere between 10 to 12 is okay. And you want to be mindful to be using standard fonts like Calibri, Helvetica, or other professional fonts. Of course, you don't want to use anything that is too cursive or too fancy looking because it becomes harder to read. Another key factor with formatting is consistency. So as you notice on this resume, all of the category titles are all caps and they're all bolded. So if you're going to, let's say, do all caps for a category title, that should be across the board. The same will go for all of their position titles are bolded and all of their company names are italicized. So you want to do the same for throughout the whole resume. You can kind of do that to your own preference. If you don't want to bold something or you don't want to italicize, that's okay. Whatever you prefer is fine as long as you're consistent throughout the whole resume. And you'll notice all the dates are on the right-hand column. That's not a requirement. Sometimes people will put it on the left, but I do encourage on the right just because it actually brings more balance to the document, where otherwise your right column is going to be a little bit empty, and then there's going to be a lot of content on the left-hand side. So just to kind of spread things out and it makes it easier to find the dates, I do encourage to keep them on the right-hand column. Okay, and then the concept of a master resume. So I talked a lot about keeping your resume to one page and why that's so important. However, you might have a lot of experiences, and as you advance in your career and you have more and more experiences, you're gonna want to add those, right? So what I always encourage is actually having a long list of resume. So it'll be a master resume, regardless of how long it is. And you kind of keep that document as a running document that you always update with every experience that you get. And then that resume could be your master resume, but then every time you're applying to a job, you want to create a one-page resume. So you can actually go to your master resume and identify the experiences that are most relevant to the job you're applying to, and then copy and paste from there into the one-pager and create a one-page resume for specifically that job. It makes it a lot easier to do the tailoring process because if you're applying to different types of jobs, you're going to have to create a different type of resume for each job, right? Because they're all going to have different skill sets that they're looking for. So with that said, you don't want to keep deleting experiences and then maybe forgetting about an experience that you might have had. So having the master resume keeps everything in one place, and then you just copy and paste and create different versions of a tailored resume. So this is just to make your process a little bit easier. And then the ATS software, which I've mentioned many times throughout this presentation. So what it is, if you haven't heard of it yet, it's an applicant tracking system. So many companies, especially larger companies that have maybe hundreds or thousands of applicants applying, those companies are likely to use software program to read your resume. So that first round, when you submit the resume, it doesn't even get to a person's eyes yet. It gets to a software system that reads your resume and identifies a certain percentage of how well you match the job description. So when we were talking about reading the job description and identifying the skills and the keywords that they're using, this is where it gets also really important because the software is going to try to match the keywords that are in the job description to your resume. So the more you have a tailored resume that actually talks about the skills they're asking of you, the higher your chances are that the ATS software is going to give the green light to pass your resume to the next stage, which is where a person actually starts reading your resume, right? Again, I always want to preface, be honest, don't talk about skills that they're asking for if you don't have them. but wherever you do have the skills, you can use the terminology they're using and you want to match the job description. So that's how the ATS software works. But it also has a hard time reading tables, text boxes, things like that, which is why I always discourage using templates. And we talked about using Microsoft Word versus Google Docs already. Okay. Some things to not include in a resume. So we talked about everything to include, how you can be creative with all of your experiences, and how you can format your resume, but things to not include. The term references available upon request. This used to be really popular years ago because that was a common trend. On the bottom, everyone would have this phrase on their resume. And sometimes even if you Google resumes now, you might, if you were curious as to what's out there, if you Google, you might still see this, but it is totally outdated. It takes an extra space, extra line off your resume that you don't need to, that you could dedicate that space to other experiences. So it's actually understood that if the employer asks for references, that you're gonna have to provide references. So it doesn't really, there's no need to say that on the resume. So that's one thing. And then a photo of yourself. In different countries, so if you were ever applying to a job outside of the US, you might need to research the trends for that country, because in different countries, it is common to include a photo on your resume. However, it is not acceptable in the United States. The only exception would be if you're applying to acting or modeling jobs, which of course is based on appearance as well. So you can include a photo on your resume for those kinds of positions. You might also have a separate portfolio with your sample work for acting and modeling. So even in that case, you don't necessarily need to put it on the resume if you're going to attach a portfolio with your resume. But for every other industry, you should not be putting a photo. And this is to prevent any discrimination, and the same goes for personal information, to prevent any discrimination. So the employer does not need to know anything about your marital status, your citizenship, or your date of birth at all in this process. When the time comes that you might be filling out HR paperwork, or you might be filling out a legal job application, because some jobs will also have a legal job application that you need to fill out in addition to submitting a resume. When that time comes for any legal documentation, yes, you're going to need to put in this kind of personal information. But on a resume, it's not needed, because a resume is to get you an interview. It's about your skills and the value that you bring to a company. So your personal characteristics have nothing to do with what you can be offering to that company. Okay. Now, many of you may have heard of ChatGPT, and if you haven't, that's okay, but it is AI software that is super popular, that just actually came out a few months ago, and it's actually become a really big topic in higher education, in academia, as well as in career counseling. So should I use ChatGPT to write my resume? If you've used ChatGPT, you might know that it is very quick to give you a lot of information, and it actually can give you some solid advice, solid information. However, coming from a career counselor's perspective, we've done some research here at the UCLA Career Center, as well as myself for CareerRise. I researched it. I tried ChatGPT to see what it actually gives and if it's legitimate. Some of the information it gives is legitimate, but others is not, because it's gaining information from all sources. So it's not, so you can't always trust what it's telling you to be accurate. But besides that, the reason I specifically will discourage writing your resume through ChatGPT is because writing a resume is a skill set, and it helps you practice for your interviews. It helps you learn how to talk about yourself, and it helps you reflect and understand what value you bring to an employer, which is going to translate really well when you're interviewing and then when you have to do the job. So if you're writing it in ChatGPT, and let's say you like the result and it sounds great, But then there is going to be a time when you get called in for an interview and you're going to have to present yourself and talk about your value that you bring and the knowledge and skills that you have. And if you're not able to share that, then you're not going to end up getting the job anyway. So the reality is it's better to start with the resume writing to understand and be able to process all that you have to offer, because that'll then lead to a better interview, and then of course, better performance at the job. You are welcome to use ChatGPT for research. I totally will say that is okay to do, because you can use research, you can use it to maybe learn about like what are different categories I can use on a resume, right? If maybe you want some information like that. But then again, going into writing the actual content, writing those bullet points, it should be authentic to your voice, because the employer will easily be able to tell if you sound completely different in an interview than how your resume and your cover letter sound. So I highly discourage writing it in there, but I think it's okay if you use it for research purposes. I have a podcast episode that came out recently with my co-host on ChatGPT and whether you should write your resumes in there. If you're interested, I'm going to ask Joseph to put the link in the chat. And you can learn a lot more about it. Thank you, Joseph. You actually included it in there. You can learn a lot more about it. We talk about some research that we found in relation to ChatGPT and resume writing. So, and what our own experience has been using the tool for our research. So I encourage you to listen to that episode if you are interested in this topic. For more, I also have a resume course, and Joseph will be putting the link to this course in the chat as well. This is on my website. I want to share with you what you'll get in my course if you were to take it. It does include a lot of the things we talked about today, but it actually has a little bit more to it. So there's step-by-step video tutorials of me explaining in detail how to do each of the different processes in a resume. And then a video demonstration formatting in Microsoft Word, especially if you're not comfortable using Microsoft Word. It also comes with a 10 plus page course workbook that has worksheets and reflection activities to help you conceptualize your resume. An in-depth explanation on how to tailor your resume using action statements. Also, it comes with a downloadable template for a reference sheet. So most often when you get offered a job, or at least if they're considering offering you a job, they will ask for references. So I have a sample reference sheet, how you can include that, and then tips on how and when to submit your references. And then there's some additional tips sections in the resume course. And this is a sample course workbook of what it looks like in terms of the reflection activities and things you might be doing, practice activities if you take the course. Okay, last but not least, I have free resources on my website as well, such as a thank you email template. So after you apply to a job and after you get an interview, with each round of your interviews, you want to send a thank you email to the interviewer. And I have a template that's a free resource on my website. If you subscribe, you will be able to access that resource along with some other resources like career exploration. If any of you are maybe thinking about changing career paths or not sure what to do as a long-term career, these resources might be helpful. And then a goal setting worksheet as well. If you're interested in receiving emails from CareerRise, you can scan this QR code. I send out newsletters regularly with different topics, as well as if I have any updated resources and things like that, I'll be sending in the newsletters. So you're welcome to scan the QR code and sign up for that as well. And the way to contact me if you wanted to ask any questions as a follow-up, or if you wanted to work with me one-on-one, you could either email me at info@careerrise.org or go to my website, careerrise.org. There's a contact page on there where you could send me a message. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm going to actually now turn it over to Joseph to go ahead and do the Q&A section.
Great. Thank you so much, Armine, and thank you for all the helpful resources, episodes, courses. For everyone who's tuning in, if you're not able to catch those, I will be sending them and sharing them out via email. We're going to transition to our Q&A with Armine. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so we'll try to get through our questions quickly. But like she said, you can contact her if you have any follow-up questions after today's session. I did throw into the chat our post-program feedback survey. For those of you who want to sit around and just listen to her answer some of these questions, feel free to take a couple minutes to complete the feedback survey. But if not, I'll also be sharing that out in a follow-up email. Armine, to start us off with some questions. We have a lot, like I said, should resume bullet points have periods if they are full sentences? And does current work experience have to be written in past or present tense?
Great question. You do not need to include periods. Some people do, that's totally okay. I would say just be consistent. If you're going to do periods, it should be all of the bullet points have them or none of them have them. Most folks don't include them, just from what I've seen. And then a current work experience should be written in present tense. Everything that was past work experiences should be written in past tense.
Great, thank you. How do you ask your current employer for results data without implying you are looking elsewhere?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. And that's maybe something we could even talk about in a one-on-one later on. But I think it depends on your relationship with the employer. You definitely don't need to let them know you're searching for another job. You can say, you know, I'm looking at just my successes and my accomplishments. Maybe it could be in your performance review at the end of the year if your employer does those reviews. That's a great time to ask. It could just be more of you approaching it as I'm reflecting on my work and how I've been performing, and I just would like to know for myself to see if there are any improvements I can make.
Great, thank you. Another viewer had a question around the master resume. So taking experience from the master resume, how would questions be asked about gaps? So maybe your experience was relevant 2 jobs ago, and so those dates don't necessarily align with your last job. How would you answer to that?
Yeah, so depending on how big the gap is, if it is a significant gap, I would say then what would be ideal is looking at even the current job that you have to be able to include that in the resume, but find different ways we can make it tailored to the job you're applying to. So we might be able to find like transferable skills. So let's say it's in a completely different industry, so you're feeling like it's not really relevant. But maybe we could think about like specific skills that might be relevant. So we could find a way to still include that job so you don't have to worry about the significant gap.
Great, thank you. I have a question around GPA. Is it really relevant to include college GPA under education?
It is not. Employers don't put too much importance on that. They care more about your skills and your experiences. If back when you were a student and you were applying to internships, I would say it was more relevant because internships have like certain GPA requirements, but jobs don't. So unless you're really proud of your GPA and you want to use it to show like an accomplishment, you can. Otherwise, it's not needed.
Great, thank you. I'm throwing these at you quickly because I want to be able to get through as many as we can. The next question is, what is your opinion of deleting graduation dates on education for those more advanced in their careers, especially for applying to startups who might value experience less and have age bias?
Yeah, it's a thing. So folks who have been out of school for a while and want to kind of keep their age, want to be mindful of that, you can totally keep your dates off of the education section. But at the end of the day too, like it might also still be in the dates that you put in your past jobs, it still might show. The reality is also think about, if you have the knowledge and the skills and the employer is still being, you feel like there's age discrimination, think about if you really want to work for that employer too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another question was around the best format for dates on the resume. Month, year, what do you suggest?
Yeah, that one is flexible. You can do whatever you prefer. Most people will do abbreviated month and then the year. But if you rather do like the numerical month and the year, that's fine too. Honestly, that's a preference thing.
There has been a trend over, people being in a job for maybe too short of a time, too long of a time. What is the best way to explain why they stayed at a job for too long or too short on their resume?
Mhm. Okay, that's going to be a more personal question, depending on how short it is. If it's like less than like 3 months, then it might cause some questions. But if it's like 6 months or more, it might not even be a question that they ask. But if they do, the question, you can always kind of answer those questions with I was looking for opportunities where I could utilize my skills a little bit better, that were a little bit more aligned with my passions or the values that I have. So you don't have to give any negative information about the employer or anything like that. Actually, you shouldn't give any negative information about the employer, but it's more about like just talking about your learning experience as a person.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, how do you reflect board positions you have served on or volunteer service?
Was that board position, like leadership? Yeah, that could be under the leadership section. Same thing. You would do similar format where you put the title that you had in the board and then the name of the organization and then the bullet points. Very similar to a job.
So you're saying if you were more involved in it and held, a pretty substantial position, you would kind of do a similar bullet point system.
Yeah, definitely.
If it's relevant to kind of what you're taking on.
Yeah, definitely. And if it's not as relevant, but you kind of want to show that you were involved, you could have like an involvement section and just list the names of the organizations that you were involved in with the dates without bullet points. So that's going to be very like personal to the person's situation and the jobs they're applying to.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna have to say that this is our last question. Should I add less relevant careers in my resume if it takes a huge portion of my career, for example, 5-year experience, and then change the career after grad school?
Also, if you were in the job for about 5 years, but it's not as relevant, I think my answer will be similar to what I said earlier about let's find ways to make this relevant in terms of skill sets that might transfer over, even if it's a completely different industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That is all the time we have with Harmony this evening. I know we can probably go on for another 30 minutes trying to answer these questions. So for those of you who submitted questions that we weren't able to answer, please feel free to reach out to Harmony. I know she'd be happy to work with you and to help you get to a better place when it comes to creating your resumes. But for those of you who are still here, please join me in thanking her for being here with us today. She is new to our Career Coaches Network. This is her first session, and so we were really happy to have her. And hopefully you were able to take 1 or 2 or 3 items away from today's session. I do want to close by throwing into the chat a link to our next Career Coaches webinar. If you haven't registered already, it's a session on finding full potential functioning, optimizing life by updating the way that you think on Thursday, July 27th. And if you were able to grab some of the links that were thrown into the chat, just want to remind you, I will be sharing them out in a follow-up email. So be on the lookout for that tomorrow. We did record the session. We will be sending it out when it is made available and uploaded to our YouTube channel. We won't be sending out the slides, but if you did have a question for Armene, like I said, please reach out to her and she'd be happy to help you with the resources that she has available on our website. Armene, again, thank you so much for being here. For everyone who tuned in, hope you have a good rest of your evening and go Bruins.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening.